morning, good afternoon, good night, everyone. My name is Karol Arambula. I'm the Executive Director and founder of MYWorld Mexico. We're a social business focused on socializing, mobilizing action, and working with absolutely every stakeholder that we can on SDG action throughout my country and Latin America. So giving this amazing opportunity, I am here today with Okalani Mariner, I hope I said that right, who's joining us from Samoa. We know it's really early there, so we're having a discussion today on her aspiring story on climate action and what we can do and how we can bring more people together. The most recent report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change gave a code red for humanity. In the words of the Secretary General, we're almost out of time to keep the world from going over 1.5 degrees Celsius. This would trigger a lot of problems to our world. So now more than ever, we need from young people and everyone that we can to join the climate movement. So Okalani, giving this context and based on everything that you have done over the past few years, and as a Pacific Islander yourself, a small island in developing countries are one of the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So we would love to hear more about the current reality of you as a climate fighter, and what is your experience, and what are some of the most pressing issues that you have to overcome?
First of all, thank you for this opportunity. It is such an honor to meet you and be a part of this session. But I think from Samoa's point, it's very much a reality. After reading the report, it was very easy to identify what was already going on in our islands, what was going on in our sister and brother nations. For us, it was so much more than a report, because I was living in these times, and I am living in these times. So you see intense cyclones, natural disasters, flooding, and you see all of these realities happening in real time. It is very difficult to always stay hopeful. And I think from a youth's perspective, we don't have the luxury of always being sad because I am from a small island nation. It's really just making sure you're resilient and pushing forward. A lot of us have to stay hopeful because being pessimistic is not really an option for us, because we have to keep fighting. And especially from a youth perspective, that can be a lot, because at this time, I'm only 18. I should be enjoying my uni life. I should be going to school and having great time with friends. But unfortunately, I have to be involved in these conversations and speak on behalf of our nations, because this is our future, and our generation will be here to look after and repair the planet however you all leave it, unfortunately. But yeah, I think for challenges in the Pacific Island, it's really just pushing for real climate justice in developed nations. If we, in our own nation, really did all of the reduce renewable energy, improve renewable energy, and reduce fossil fuel, it won't make as big of an impact than it would in developed nations. And for us, I think it's really just pushing governments and leaders to really prioritize climate change and climate justice, especially because it is a global issue. And after reading those reports, we already know that we're at 1.2. And that looks scary. And I am afraid. I am afraid that this might not be reversible, and there might not be a future for me to live in. So it's really just pushing government to please change their legislations, to push for actual change, because they're not going to be the ones here to face the repercussions if they don't. I hope I made sense.
Yeah, definitely, Okalani. And you bring a point that's unfortunately a true reality, is that this young generation will have to deal with the burden of irresponsibility and lack of knowledge of what we're doing with the world in especially the last 70 years. So yes, I'm worried as well. I'm of course scared because the consequences are already there, and what we're looking at, it's already happening. So what is your vision for real transformative action? I'm really curious about that, and how can we get there? How can this be realized, especially if we consider that the COP is taking place? Is it something that's going to be tangible? It's going to have tangible results? Are we going to really look transformative action from our governments? And if not, what can we do as citizens to lead that transformative action?
I think to frame COP in mind, I definitely think for my vision personally, it's to really see more Brown, Indigenous people of color involved in these conversations. We have always been the conservators and stewarders of our environment. We were the first in our land, and so we always had that symbiotic relationship. We knew that we had to rely on nature in order to survive, and so in order to do that, we had to respect it, and we had that relationship. So for me, I feel that we could really draw a lot of knowledge from involving BIPOC people in these conversations and really just listening to their wealth of knowledge. They have always been looking after these lands, and they have always been preserving our environment. And I feel like in order to really see transformative change, it's adapting some of those practices and teachings in order to really reduce the carbon and everything going on with this climate crisis, to be honest. And another thing I will say is youth engagement. And youth engagement in the sense of really pushing a lot of our leaders and people in power to really make change, because despite being ambitious and passionate, we are not the ones who are making these policies. We are not the ones with years of knowledge in school. All we could possibly do is really push and fight and hold those people in power accountable for their actions. So in COP's point of view, I think that if my hope is that they actually take some of the advice of the youth. I do know that there is a Youth for Climate discussion in Milan, Italy at the end of this month. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it because of border restrictions and just the difficulty of traveling during COVID times. But I do know that they are creating an agenda. And my hope is that in COP, they do listen to some of the policies and agendas that the youth put forward, because those are the priorities of us. And those are what we think is important for the future. So I think that's something that I am hopeful, and that is my vision for the future in order to see true climate justice. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Okalani. And yes, I'm very hopeful of the role of youth engagement, not only in the COP process, but in the overall UN fora. You see all these different conferences and processes taking place being led by young people. So I'm not so worried about young people. I'm actually more worried about people from older generations. So maybe one question that I would ask you is, what will be your call to action for both young people who are already working on this, but also to other generations that are starting to thinking about it, that are starting to change their mind about climate actions and might want to do something? What will be like the first thing that you would tell them to do?
Do your research. I feel like there's so much misinformation being spread from the elder generation. And it's my biggest fear, because I know I can only speak from a youth perspective in the Pacific Islands, but we do revere our elders. And so if our elders did the research and really learned about climate justice and spoke up about it, it would make a really big impact, because for me, they in my country, they would listen more if it came from the older generation. And so for me, my encouragement is just really do your research and speak up about this. Your voice does matter, and hearing you believe what we believe is very encouraging for us. And it helps push us to keep doing what we do. For youth, I will say to call up your leaders, call up your policymakers read about their policies? Are the people you're supporting for climate justice? Do they have policies that support this? Do your NDCs actually target reducing carbon emissions? Are they ambitious enough? Can it be more ambitious? These are questions you should be asking yourself, and just really pushing to make those change makers listen. I think that that's my only encouragement for both.
That's actually very, very true and very, very inspired. Very, very inspiring. So Okalani, in that way, I'm very curious about what inspired you to take action. Was it an event that happened? Was it a book? Was it a piece of art? Was it music? Was it a person in particular that made you say, hey, I have to join this cause?
Actually, yes, it was. I think if I really go all the way back to when I started, it would be my grandfather. He's a big person on legacy. When I was a child, he used to tell me stories of my ancestors, of who we were descended from, and he really just loved looking at legacy and carrying on that. So when I got into climate action, I realized that in order to protect his legacy and in order to preserve my people and my nations, I had to fight for climate justice, because about 2 years ago, he passed away. But before he did, I visited our home in our main island. So this is the main island, but we have a bigger island. And so we have a small home on the beach side, and the coastal erosion had completely taken hold of that. It was not the same place I had been to when I was a child. And I think it really struck home to me that climate was real. Climate change was real. So for me, what really pushes me is preserving my culture, preserving my family's legacy, and that means climate justice, because our islands are at risk, but we will not be the last. But yeah, that's what inspires me, my grandfather.
That is absolutely beautiful and a way to inspire many of us. We have to look at what's happening in our local context. How were things before we were here or in the previous years, and just taking the best out of it to continue to preserve our nature, to preserve our planet, and to preserve our well-being as humans. So thank you so much, Okalani, for joining us in this dialogue. It was really, really inspiring ahead of COP. This is a very important discussions to take place during this dark times, but talking to people like you definitely makes it hopeful for all of us. So make sure all of you watching join us for action for what's taking place ahead of COP, ahead of all the different processes in favor of climate action. And you can do that by signing up and register at actforsdgs.org. Thank you, Okalani, and thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much.